Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tara Fappiano, and I have the distinct pleasure of being your moderator for today's event. I am a board member for Volunteer New York, as well as being an educational advocate and attorney. A good part of my volunteer experience has been in my work in the schools, whether in the PTA, where I served as a president and chair of the special education PTA for a number of years, or offering services to families in an advisory or pro bono capacity. Thank you to Volunteer New York for hosting this panel. It did so because Volunteer New York believes relationships matter, and then volunteerism is an important strategy in building connections and resilient communities. There is no question that our educational system is facing the most extraordinary set of challenges in modern history with the pandemic, especially here in New York. In March of last year, schools had to turn on a dime and quickly adjust to a world in which teachers and students quite simply could not be in the same building, much less the same room. Over these many months, students may have returned to school, perhaps not. Perhaps we're going to be seeing some changes again very soon. We just heard actually in the last hour or so that New York City schools are going to be closing starting tomorrow. Through all of this, the students bring with them a whole new set of concerns about learning, but also about grief, death, uncertainty, perhaps financial insecurity, and separation from their peers. Resources that were already limited have been pushed to their max and beyond. So today, we come together as a collection of like-minded community leaders to learn about the diverse needs of our school communities and, quite simply, learn how we might be able to help through our nonprofits and volunteer efforts. I have the pleasure of introducing to you each of our following panelists. I will call them by name and then ask each of them to take a few minutes just to tell us about who you are and what your organization does. I will start with Beth Glauber-Ahern, who is the Program Director of Children's Services at MHA of Westchester. And she's joined today also by Barbara Bernstein, who is the Chief Planning Officer of MHA of Westchester. Beth and Barbara, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for having us here today. I really appreciate it, and it was very nice to see so many familiar names in the chat box and seeing people. So, as we were thinking about today, one of the things that came to my mind is that when MHA was founded almost 75 years ago, one of our two main priorities was working with school districts to help children. And it's something that we have continued to do through this time. We'll talk more about our services as we go along, but I just want to mention that we are in the school districts. Certainly in Rockland, we have school-based clinics, as well as working with schools throughout Westchester. And we also have, we provide across the board behavioral health services for children as young as 3 in Rockland and 5 on the Westchester side, for families as well. And we've now also integrated substance use services and connections to primary care. So we'll talk much more about the organization as we go on. I just wanted to just introduce it that way. Thank you.
Beth, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Thank you also for having me. I'm happy to be here. And as Tara mentioned, I oversee, we have a subset of services at MHA specifically for serving children. Typically, our services are all mobile. We meet with our families and children in the home or in the community. Obviously, things are a little different right now. But I'm excited to be here just for this conversation, but also to help to build some connections. I think right now, kids are in a lot of need, and we're here, and we want to get the word out there that we're available for supports. But as Barbara said, we'll talk a bit more about the specifics of our services as we go along. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kathy Hallis, who's the Executive Director of Childcare Council of Westchester. Welcome, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for including me, and good afternoon to everybody and others on the panel. The Childcare Council Westchester has been around for 52 years. There are times, particularly recently, when I feel like I've been there for that entire 52-year period myself. We find ourselves in very interesting times. The council does a lot of things. We certainly try to provide support to the almost 750 childcare and after-school businesses in the county. But what I would like to talk about in particular is our services to parents. Throughout the pandemic, childcare programs have been open. They remain open. Many folks assume that that may not be the case, but we keep a list of who is out there. And, we're ready to help parents find childcare that will, meet the needs that they have, whether those be parents who are customers of the school districts or employees. And we have been working, I think, successfully with some school districts in that regard. We also are currently administering a childcare scholarship program that is available for essential workers and school personnel, and we're anxious to get the word out about that as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much for being here. Next, I have Krishna Horrigan, who has a very lengthy title, which I'm going to try to get through. He is the Outreach Services Programmer, Public Innovation and Engagement at the Westchester Library System. How'd I do?
You did a good job. I'm so sorry to have that long title for you, but you can blame my boss. So hello, everyone. I work for the Westchester Library System. Many of you are familiar with your local libraries, but the Westchester Library System for just over 60 years now has been creating a platform for our libraries to share resources, to collaborate on programs and professional development. And on top of all of that, we operate a bunch of different outreach programs and activities around the county, which are really all about leveraging library resources, bringing library resources out to underserved populations, and trying to get people to use some of the services available to them at their local library. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. I think there's plenty that I'm going to learn here from my nonprofit colleagues and from everyone who's attending during the breakout rooms.
Terrific. Thank you. Next, I have Dr. Ellen McDonald, who is the Director of Innovative Technology at the Arlington Central School District.
Thanks, Tara. Happy to be here and to participate with this awesome panel of people. And thanks to all of you who have chosen to join us this late afternoon on Hump Day on Wednesday. As Tara said, I'm Ellen McDonald. I currently serve as the Director of Innovative Technology for the Arlington Central School District, which is up here in Dutchess County. We serve approximately 8,000 students, and our district consists of 8 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a high school. Geographically, we cover 114 square miles. But prior to Arlington, I served in the Tuckahoe Union Free School District in Westchester County, first as the middle school principal, then I was the assistant superintendent for curriculum, instruction, and pupil personnel services, and my last role there was assistant superintendent for curriculum, instruction, and technology. In contrast to Arlington, Tuckahoe serves approximately 1,200. Ooh, yeah, that would be freaky if 12,000 kids showed up, right, Tara? 1,200 students, 1 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high school, and covers a geographic area of about 1.2 square miles. I like to say that I left a small district wearing a lot of hats and moved to a large district with 1 big hat. But being responsible for instructional technology in these disparate districts, has been a challenge and a pleasure. And I look forward to sharing more about that in our conversations today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We were supposed to be also joined by Dr. Demia Harris-Madden. I don't see her yet, so I will skip over her. But Katie, if you see her join, just alert me and I will make sure she gets introduced to our group today. Okay. So I'm going to start the conversation off by asking some of our panelists to respond to some opening questions. Dr. McDonald, let me start with you. So you have had this unique experience of being in a school district that was shut down right in the first days of the pandemic in that New Rochelle containment zone, where you had already put into place a great deal of technology before it happened. And then in your new position, from what I've been seeing on Twitter and LinkedIn and all that good stuff, you've still been putting in technology even as we come into the last month or so. So you kind of represent the vast diversity of our school communities. Where do you see the most academic challenges in continuing to have to deliver educational content to students as we go into these winter months, and how do we solve that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've been thinking about it. And for me, our largest challenges really revolve around maintaining student engagement, right? So as these COVID-19 cases are continuing to climb, most of our school districts are preparing for that potential that either the school district or the state is going to determine that they need to close their doors to in-person learning. As you mentioned, Tara, New York City decided, that they have hit that wall and they won't be coming in tomorrow. So when I was in Tuckahoe last spring, we were, as you said, a part of that first closure due to our proximity to the epicenter of the New Rochelle containment area. And we were thankfully well on our way and had one-to-one technology in place. But it did require deploying devices to home for our 2nd through 5th graders in the span of a day and a half. My district, Arlington, right now was in a very different place and needed to just begin deployment of devices to home use because none had ever been sent home prior to the pandemic. What I can say, however, is that, in both of these cases, and I'm sure in many others, we're not entering this new potential closure in the same place where we were in the spring, right? Massive amounts of resources have been deployed. Here, we've done Chromebooks, we've done Wi-Fi hotspots for our students, we've got additional devices, headsets, webcams to teachers, right? Our teachers have been working constantly to improve their craft, right? To either do fully remote or to do hybrid teaching, and it's been a really steep learning curve. They have worked tirelessly to create these connections with their students so they can keep them engaged. So many districts, such as ours here in Arlington, did make curriculum decisions to determine what is that core content for each of these courses, that essential learning that would be the focus of the year. Because we recognize the futility of just moving on to the next lesson to just cover everything that was on the list. We need to give our teachers and our students, a little ability to breathe so that they can stay connected so that learning can occur. And, this year it's unlike any other. We know that. So in my perspective, finding new ways to engage those students is what's going to make us successful. So you're asking, how do we get there, right? What do we do to work on that engagement? We in Arlington happen to be using G Suite Enterprise for Education, which brings to Google Meet a lot of the features that Zoom already has with breakout rooms, Q&A, polling features, things you can do during a lesson to change up how the students are interacting with you. And our teachers are getting pretty adept at that, and also really rethinking what instructional design looks like for a period of time, and recognizing that students can't just sit staring at a screen all day, right? For every class, they can't. You do a quick Kahoot, you do a quick poll, you request that they add something to the chat, you do, a wiggle break or, a go noodle or something to get them up and moving and responding in some way. So students so they don't just log on, so wave to their teacher, turn off the camera, and you have no idea if they went outside to play or fell asleep or if they're actually still with you. Another thing that's happening is our teachers and administrators are contacting home more frequently than they might otherwise, right? My tech office and I were still getting requests to help out with connectivity and device issues. And I think we're 2.5 months in, you're just now telling me you can't connect, right? But it's happening now because some parents are now home that weren't home before. They're overloading their own internet, right? And we need to figure this out. I have gone personally to families' houses to see what's going on. Why is our district-owned device being dropped from their Wi-Fi and no other device in the household is having that happen? And I know others in my district have also been going home, right? Doing those home visits, checking, seeing what's going on so that we can keep these students engaged and keep them accessing their learning, right? I mean, none of it's easy. None of this is normal, right?
No.
But if we focus on, we're not there yet. We're not done, right? That we just have to keep improving our methods and coming up with the new ways to engage students and their families, then we know we're on the right path.
It's amazing and challenging work, and all the teachers get so much credit for hanging in there through all of this. Really, really remarkable. I want to talk to you now, Mr. Horrigan. For me, growing up decades ago, I will always see libraries as a place that I went for stories and to open my eyes to different worlds through books. And actually, some of my earliest volunteer experiences were at my public library. Today, libraries are serving a critical community role as a resource for many services. In what way has the library system been a source of resources during the pandemic? And what might volunteers and nonprofits do to support those efforts as they pertain to students and families?
Thank you for such a kind story about the libraries. I appreciate that. And I hope there are others here who've had similar experiences. If you've stepped foot in a library within the past few years, you've probably seen all of the different things that our libraries have been doing. We got 38 different libraries. That means 38 different strategies, paths, ideas, and it's really that has shown in interesting ways over the course of the pandemic. So at the very beginning, with all of the libraries closing, immediately the rush was to promote our digital resources. We knew schools were closing down. We wanted to promote some of our study supports that we have available online. We wanted to talk about other resources that we had for parents to help them work with their children while they're learning from home. And we started to shift our programming online, resorting to things like Zoom, resorting to things like Google Meets or YouTube live streaming, Facebook live streaming, whatever we could do to continue to get programs out to people, whether that was a story time or a book talk or a discussion group, ESL classes, English conversation groups. All of that has moved online, and that has kind of been the through line of the pandemic, our online programming. But Ellen, like you're saying, kids are already spending all of their time online, and for adults who are working from home, they're spending all of their time on the computer. And it's tough to ask them to spend another hour of their evening on Zoom. So the libraries have really had to get creative as well about the types of programs they're offering. They've started to do like takeaway things, so take home, grab and go crafts, and different, more engaging experiences beyond just sitting there in front of your computer for another hour of the day. So talking about grab and go crafts, as the libraries were more comfortable and staff started to come back into the libraries, they reopened services like curbside pickup so that you could still get library materials and return library materials without stepping foot inside. And then as we were getting our safety protocols down, more and more of them started providing computer access again and access to printers. These are services that the libraries offer that many of us don't really think about day to day, but for the folks who relied on those things, families, children, seniors who use the computers and printers and the internet at the library, that was crippling to not have access to those things. So many libraries now are doing appointment basis for their computer access. And as we're moving forward through the winter into the spring, we're starting to look more at digital access and digital equity. That is something that many of the libraries are turning their eyes to, and many of the nonprofits in Westchester are currently turning their eyes towards, trying to figure out what we can do, what our position and our role is in making sure that people have equitable access to devices and to the internet. Especially important for school children and families who do not have internet access at home. So that's things like lending out hotspots, lending out devices, providing internet connection outside of the library in the parking lot if people need to come and use the internet after hours. Really, they're trying to be as creative as they can, and we're nowhere near the end of what the libraries are capable of there. So there's a lot to be done, and I encourage you to see what your library is currently up to, and see if they'd be willing to hear some feedback from you. So how can volunteers and nonprofits help? Well, I think first, it's really just a matter of word of mouth. I think there are plenty of people in this county who are not using the library for no specific reason. It's just that they haven't thought about it in a while, or they haven't been there in a while, so they're not so acquainted with what's available to them. So really a big part of it is just reminding people that the libraries are out there. They have resources to support you, especially with school, such as homework support. We have a program called tutor.com where you can get live tutoring. All of those types of things, people just need to know that they're available and they're free. Other than that, I would say check with your local library, see what they're doing in terms of volunteering and their local efforts. Some of them are running study groups. Some of them are reconvening parent groups where they can talk about parenting strategies and strategies for helping their children through school. Many of the libraries are still operating their volunteen programs, so teen volunteers, and that looks different depending on which library you're talking to, but many of them have moved the volunteering activities online. So I think that's a little summary of the timeline of the libraries.
That's terrific. It seems like there's a lot of volunteer opportunities there for folks if they're looking for that. And also for kids, teens and whatnot to get involved. So that's terrific. Ms. Hallis, I'm going to turn to you now. And as we've been discussing the impact upon families, childcare concerns become a huge issue. Teachers have and may continue to have to care for their own children while they're teaching from home. Families have students learning from home and they have to figure out how to do that while they're working home, or they're an essential worker and they don't have the choice of staying at home. And there was just an article in the New York Times that came out, and we've been reading about how the impact on the workforce is women leaving the workforce in greater and greater numbers than we've seen in decades. So that has its own economic impact. In your role at the Childcare Council, what are you seeing through all of this?
Yeah, well, it's a time unlike any other time, and unlike other industries, childcare has always been somewhat fragile financially. So even before COVID-19 landed, there were definitely, difficulties. People unable to access childcare, many people who needed childcare and unable to pay for it. And that's, of course, only been made worse by COVID-19. But let me say this. As I mentioned at the outset, childcare was deemed an essential service. The people who work in the field take that very seriously. And while a number of after-school programs were not open because many of them were located in school buildings and thus they were unable to, most of the other childcare programs have been and have been working really, really diligently to offer safe, healthy care to children. One of our roles has been to make sure that they have the latest in guidance from the CDC, from the Department of Health. We have health people on our health professionals on our own staff. We host regular phone calls. Have one tomorrow where we will be going over the latest travel advisory, for example, so that childcare programs take this guidance and actually implement it. We've been a site of, we look like Costco earlier because we were a repository for all kinds of PPE. We still are, and we're getting that out, into the field. And I would have to say that up until probably this last week, we were unaware of very few cases of COVID in childcare programs. That has started to change. And the cases that we're hearing about are not with the children, they are with staff. And so I think there will be additional kinds of protocols that people will put, into place. One of the things that most programs have done is smaller group sizes so that they take social distancing, very, very seriously. As school districts have adopted different kinds of schedules, there are many parents who are sending their school-age children to a childcare program on the days when they're, when the kids are not sitting in a school seat. And many childcare businesses have risen to that challenge by getting additional technology and additional training and support for those children. In addition, the county used federal CARES money to set up, I think, 19 different remote learning locations, principally for, to help school districts, and often in cooperation with school districts. So again, as I said earlier, the principal message that we want to get out is that there is not probably the continuum of options that we'd like to see, but there are options out there. And in many cases, there's also financial assistance available to families to reduce the burden on them. So we want people to call us. We are happy to do Zoom calls for school districts directed either at their parents or their personnel. We have bilingual services. We have somebody who will help ascertain if somebody might be eligible for the public childcare subsidy. And as I said earlier, we're also administering a childcare scholarship program. And we really want everybody to utilize that as much as possible.
Thank you. Okay. Now we have Beth and Barbara, both from MHA services. In planning this event, we actually realized that we could have dedicated an entire presentation to mental health impact of the crisis on our children. So just for now, if you could touch a little bit on what you've been seeing as the most profound concerns with regard to mental health, either now or being exacerbated by the pandemic, and what types of resources are available to address those concerns.
Thank you. Beth, why don't you start talking about some of your experiences and then I'll pick up.
Okay, sounds good. I'll try not to go on for too long because I agree that I think, as I was trying to prepare to answer this, it certainly could be, a day-long event. I think there's clearly a lot of complexity. So that was one of the points I did want to raise. I do think it is a complex conversation. And I'm very much looking forward to the breakout group to hear everybody else's experiences. I am speaking from my own lens of working in these mental health programs for youth. And I want to just be careful to have a conversation that acknowledges the nuance of the situation as well. Because I think, as with any challenge or trauma, everybody reacts differently. We can't assume that everybody's doing terribly right now, right? We need to really approach people as individuals. We're all trying to figure out whether we're mental health providers or school staff or parents, trying to figure out how to respond and support our kids because we know that this is hard. And I think we just have to be attentive to approaching it on a individual basis, meeting the kids where they're at, not assuming that they're doing fine if they look fine, but on the other hand, not assuming that they're all doing terribly, right? Because I think too, in preparing to answer this question, honestly, the first thing that came to my mind was the resilience that we've seen from day one. My friends and family obviously know the work that I do, and everybody's comments were always like, oh, your business must be booming, like things must be terrible. And, and while work was stressful, sure, we had to pivot like everybody else. We were finding that we were still able to engage the kids. We were able to provide that support. And overall, they were doing okay, right? They were engaging, they were, and granted, not all of them are doing that fantastic at baseline, but we weren't seeing this incredible spike in issues or anything like that. So, I think just acknowledging that resilience, the creativity, the flexibility that kids have. Maybe they're just blissfully unaware. That works too. I don't know, I'll take it. it's been really inspiring to see. And I think too, that speaks a lot to the adults that are surrounding them, whether that's their parents, their caregivers, school staff, if they've been lucky enough to get into a school building this year. You know, we know that kids are learning as they go as to how to manage what they're experiencing, how to process an experience, and how to respond to it. So if that, you know, if the adults around them are modeling calm, or even maybe they're not always calm. I don't know. I have 2 kids. I'm not always calm. They can see that, you know, I can take some deep breaths. I can acknowledge this stress, this incredible stress that we're all experiencing, and we can move forward and we can make plans. So I think we've been seeing that a lot too with the parents and the caregivers of the children that we serve. And certainly in the school districts, I have to I think we're forever indebted to people who work in our schools at this point. I'm constantly amazed. You know, so and as far as the impact, and I think some things to keep an eye out for. So I was thinking too, like, yes, you know, I don't want to sugarcoat the conversation. Yes, there are kids that are struggling for sure. There are kids that have been impacted by this more severely than others. So that is certainly there. And I think too, there are things we need to keep an eye on for the long term. Like there are ways that kids and adults are struggling right now in this moment. And then there are things that are going to have an impact for years to come. So, you know, just things to keep an eye on, I guess. I wish I had answers, but I don't think that I do. So I think, you know, I don't want to go on too long, but I think just a few things that we've noticed is really one big struggle is the lack of or the disruption of routine and structure, especially for the younger kids, especially for kids with special needs or on the autism spectrum who really require that structure. That can really lead, without it, it can lead to a lot of dysregulation with emotions, with behaviors. You know, and we've seen parents trying really hard to do the best they can to create that at home, but you know, they don't all have the capacity or the resources. So that's been a real concern. And then I think, you know, isolation. Some kids are more isolated than others, depending on their situation. But that separation from peers or from other adults outside the home, that can have a real impact. And what I would say we've seen, particularly with our youth who identify as LGBTQ, especially those who identify as transgender, they're the ones we've probably seen the most spike in symptoms, some increase in suicidal ideation, oftentimes because their home environment is not a supportive or welcoming place for the way that they identify. So that, I would say that's probably the one that stood out to me the most. You know, otherwise, I think there's something, this isn't news, but the increase in screen time, I know that's been mentioned. That's a real challenge. You know, and I think too, another one to keep an eye on for the long term on my mind, because we, especially a lot of the kids that we work with, part of why they came to us was because they had a lot of school avoidance. And so some of them right now are really living their best life. They're like, yep, I don't have to go to school. I can do it from my bed. This is perfect. You know, so that's great for them for right now. But, you know, we all hope that someday we'll get to go back on a regular basis into a school building. And I'm afraid, you know, I'm just nervous about how this is being kind of reinforced for them. So just, you know, and again, I don't know the answers, but maybe just continuing those conversations with those students that we know that that's a concern for. So, you know, I think in terms of the ways that we can support, you know, we've been doing the best we can with the circumstances. We've been able to provide telehealth And when it's safe, we have started doing some in-person visits, typically outside. Who knows what might evolve over the coming weeks and months, but you know, I've been so impressed with our staff who've gotten very creative in working to engage the kids over Zoom or over the phone or whatever it might be. And we have found, you know, while the youth is always our kind of identified client, we have been providing a lot of additional support to the parents and the caregivers, because they do, you know, they need a lot right now. And when they're the only ones in the home, you know, and they don't have the ability to have kind of hands-on support from the school or hands-on support from their mental health providers, they're really bearing the weight of a lot of that. So we've been trying to support them as much as possible. We have a number of clinical services. We have therapists who can do individual therapy and family therapy. We have some access to psychiatrists for medication management. We have a number of like therapeutic support services that can provide more like skill building, some peer support, peer mentoring. We have care management, which can be a great resource, especially for those families where the parents are kind of strapped for time and resources. So, you know, you're always welcome. I believe Tara said she'd be sharing our contact information. So, you know, please feel free to reach out if you have a kid in mind that you feel like needs something and you're not quite sure what. We're always here to kind of bounce ideas off of and to see if we have a support that we could provide. So, sorry if I went on a little long there. Barbara, I don't know if you wanted to.
You're fine, Barbara. Did you want to add anything? Yeah.
We could do this for a full day.
Yeah, it's very easy. And, you know, you're going to have a chance to really get into some granular detail on some of these things in your breakout rooms as well. And if you want to add something, Barbara, by all means.
I'll quickly add, Beth certainly speaks through the lens of children who are already engaged with us in services. So they've already been identified as having some mental health challenges. We also have been doing a number of things for the community. And Beth mentioned screen time, and actually I'm reminded, Kathy, you'll remember the name Mark Burton, who is a developmental pediatrician who talks about the impact of screen time. And through Task Force on Child Abuse and Neglect, we'd have him speak to us years ago, speaking about the impact of screen time on children's emotional, academic, you know, just social emotional development. We brought him in I think March, to talk about, during this era of COVID, when all of our kids are in front of screens, how do parents manage this best, knowing everything we already know about the impact of screen time, but we are now relying on this. And so what do we do there? And that was the first of a series of community conversations that we've done that have talked a lot about resilience. We've talked about post-traumatic growth, that in many cases, real trauma can be an impetus to developing coping mechanisms that provide good skills for the long run. And we've been talking about a lot of those things that are geared toward the community as a whole, particularly families and parents. There's a lot more. We'll talk about it in the breakout room, but I just want to mention also, and we will talk about it in resources, the Mental Health Association of New York State has established a school resource center. I can share information about it. It provides a wealth of information for parents, for educators, for districts, and it comes out of the Mental Health Education in Schools Act that went into effect about 2 years ago.
That's terrific. I was reading about that actually recently, and I'm glad that you touched on the virtual overload section. I'm going to open it up a little bit for some community questions before we go into our breakout room, but some of the ones that were submitted hit right on that topic, and but we're a little bit more specific. And, you know, the question was, are we seeing there being virtual overload? And I do think that that is a concern for a lot of parents. And some of the other related questions were, how do parents solve that problem and engage with their students using social media or other virtual avenues, and how do we also then incorporate some physical activity into the days for our students? So I'll kind of open that up to all the panelists. If you've got some ideas, some suggestions, love to hear them.
Well, I probably have as many questions as I have, suggestions, because,
Good.
Yeah. With the Childcare Council, although the programs we work with serve children from birth to age 12, a lot of the kids are, very, very young. And our posture as an agency has been for many years to minimize screen time at all costs, particularly for, birth to 3. So we've been, struggling, with this whole thing. And we're actually having Dr. Mark Burton do a public forum in January. Barbara mentioned it before. This is kind of a specialty because, frankly, we need some guidance. And the other question we have too is that while we understand that remote learning is here probably to stay, we are particularly wondering about how well is it working with kindergartners and first graders and, really young children for whom, the expectation of their sitting for any period of time is really questionable. And some of the feedback we're getting from parents who are having to try to support children of that age at home learning remotely is they're really struggling and the children are really turning off. So what have we done with childcare programs? While we're trying to help them navigate all of that, we are also trying to bring resources and curriculum that bring people back outdoors, doing motor things, experiential learning. We got some foundation funding this summer, and we did a series of things. One of them was called The Joy of Bubbles, and we dropped kits off of resources to 50 programs and gave them TA as they were working with the children outside on any number of things, but using, materials and being outdoors and whatever. So anyway, I think it behooves all of us, parents or service deliverers, to try to think of ways for people to connect in that way. It can't be all remote. I think we have to really work very hard to balance it.
That's very good. Yeah, I think you're right. I know that Mr. Horrigan mentioned some of those, drop-offs and pickups and curbside deliveries and all of those things. And they're all great ideas. And then you also mentioned, Kathy, and had the question about how parents with younger students are what kind of supports are available to them as they're going through this. At least, I'm looking at it for the foreseeable, school year, right? We've got to at least get till June. At least we have to plan for that. And, unless there's going to be some major change between now and then, that's what we need to be looking at. I wonder, maybe Dr. McDonald, if you have, some strategies to suggest to help with structure and routine. Beth mentioned that's, one thing. I know in our house, we did have that school avoidance issue for a little while. It was temporary, all of those things.
Yeah, there's no one answer for any more than one child, right? So what works for one isn't going to work for another. One of the things that we're doing in our district right now is trying to be really thoughtful about, again, this is the preparing for the potential to not see the kids, because priority one is to get them in as much as we can. Right. And different districts have done that differently. And it depends a lot on your floor plan, like where do you even have space for children, and maximizing and making sure you're really getting as many in safely, right, that you can. But my mind has already shifted from that to what are we going to do when we're told we can't come, none of them can come in, right? So all of our buildings are working on that concept of like a go kit, right? We've got kids that we'll see tomorrow and Friday. Maybe we're not going to see him again for months, right? Maybe next week is when the governor is going to say after Thanksgiving, nobody comes back till the middle of January. And, and so all our buildings are being thoughtful about the stuff. So kids can do things other than sit and stare, right, at a screen all day. We have actually different schedule for when we're fully remote than when we're in person. We cannot expect children to sit there in front of screens, all the way through the day. It's got to be touch points and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have our morning meeting, kindergartners, and then you're going to go off and do that activity that I sent home with you. And then we're going to touch in again later. Because we can't just, just if you don't have a 5-year-old, I've had them, I don't have them anymore. They were all much older. But just imagine, right? A 5-year-old trying to sit and look at anything for any kind of block of time. They get tired of story time in 10 minutes too, right? In lesson design, we've never done let's sit for 6 hours and do something together, right? The concept doesn't exist K-12, even in high school, you're switching classes. So you get that moment to stand up and move and refocus. So it's really been sort of, figuring out what materials can we give other than a Chromebook, right? That can engage students, and what are we asking them to do with their time, right? How is it broken up so that it isn't just looking at screen time down the schedule for the day. And then the point that was made about how are we going to help families who are home with their children again is huge, because a teacher, right, part of public schooling, at least one of the concepts is group instruction, right? We assign 25 children to one teacher. I don't have 25 teachers to send to those 25 children's homes when they're spread, right? So I still have that one adult and all of those children. So the only way they can connect with them is remotely live, right? So they're breaking down the period, saying, okay, now I'm going to meet with these 3 while you 20 go do something else. And it changes all the time. I'll reiterate, we are not where we were in the spring. No school district is, right? No school district that I know of is participating in learning right now the same exact way they were in April and May and June, right? They all have evolved. They all have thought about how else can we do this? And with this potential of what feels like a going back, right? It feels like we may not send anyone to school anymore. It will look different because we've learned a lot, but we're going to need to have that communication piece with our families, because different families are going to need different amounts of touch points and different amounts of connections from us. And we just got to keep learning. We have to keep pivoting and innovating, and whatever word you want to put on that. We can't sit still, because none of this is good. So we can't say, oh yeah, we figured it out. We know how to do this, because there's no good way. There's no one good way.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other questions that we received was about how to help to support, especially teens and tweens, a little bit through the disappointments of things, right? And I actually know in my household, that's been a big conversation point, not just with the kids, but with the parents. And there's all this anxiety about missing the milestones, the developmental things, but also just the day-to-day things of like crushes and romantic relationships and seeing your friends. I wonder what you all are seeing in that area, and how we might be able to support those conversations.
Yeah, the socialization aspect and I guess in general, just mental wellness and mental resilience and things like that. I've seen the libraries prior to COVID dabbling their fingers in that, or dipping their toes in that topic, and doing things like more. I mean, they've been doing social programs for teens for a long time, but they've also branched out into wellness things like breathing, meditation, yoga, and now that has also kind of exploded, because it's everyone is struggling with incredible stressors day to day in our current reality, and I think the libraries are trying to provide some sort of relief there. On the social aspect, it's trying to put together, I guess, very low pressure events like a movie night, or just low pressure things that teens can be involved in. But the struggle, like all of you are saying, is that, for the most part, the easiest way to do that is to facilitate something online, whether it's by a voice chat or a phone call, like a conference call, or through something like Zoom, which once again returns us to the computer screen. So it's really I see a lot of libraries trying to instill these practices and values of resilience and wellness, and then asking their patrons to kind of take that offline with them. Many libraries are doing programs about managing work-life balance, which is just harder now than it ever has been. And same thing with school life balance, managing all of these different deadlines and things that you might have on your learning management system when it's so scattered and you don't have that kind of grounding experience of being in a class at the school where you can kind of focus on one topic at a time.
I just want to ask Katie, who you met briefly at the beginning of the session, if she could just speak for a few minutes and tell us everybody about Volunteer New York.
So I'm Katie Pfeiffer with Volunteer New York. We are very grateful to Tara and the rest of the panelists for joining us. So Volunteer New York, we are all about connecting people and people power and really striving to create a really strong and connected, resilient community. And so like my kind of big takeaways from this is that nobody can do it alone. Like this, like everybody talking in the different parts, whether it's mental health or technology in the schools and the resources and childcare, nobody can do it alone. And there are some really great resources that are out there and available to really kind of come together. And whether it's, you know, staff from Mental Health Association or staff at Childcare Council that are, you know, doing the work, or volunteers, you know, at the library system, or volunteers in a program that we haven't come up with, there are really great ways to connect with people and really pull things together. And so we are going to make sure that we share some of the resources that did come up in that follow-up email to really just make sure that there's a way for that follow-up. And Volunteer New York is here for any of those kind of ideas that you have that you're like, we want to do this for our students, but we're not exactly sure how. There's probably a way to bring volunteer and people power into doing that, whether that is, you know, different things that are going home to students that people, you need volunteers or someone to cut and the teachers are overwhelmed and can't do it all themselves. Or maybe it's, you know, reaching out to other schools to make sure that they're aware and getting one of, you know, Kathy's staff members to come and talk about, you know, the subsidy and program to make sure they're aware of it. All those different things. There's ways to involve people and continue to build on this and provide students and parents and teachers kind of with some of these much needed kind of support because it is not easy. It's 2020 and the recovery is going to take a while, but our community really has come together. And I think there's many ways that we can continue to work together and support each other. So kicking it back to you, Tara.
All right. Well, thank you. And Katie, I owe you a big thank you because you put a tremendous amount of time and effort into helping get this panel off the ground, as long with all of the staff members at Volunteer New York, who are among the best I have ever worked with. And they are just tremendous and put their heart and soul into everything. So thank you so much for what you've been doing since day one, turning on a dime like everyone else to make sure that your efforts are helping everybody through this pandemic. And to the panelists, again, thank you so much for being here today. You represent the best of our educational and nonprofit leadership in this community, and we appreciate all that you've brought to the table for discussion and for communication and everything you do every day to help improve our communities on a daily basis. As Katie mentioned, we're going to send out a communication. I will say to the panelists, if you mentioned anything or something came up in your breakout rooms and you just want to throw it into an email, we'll just make a list and share it among all of the participants today. I learned even of some resources today, so it'll be really good to see where this all goes. And thank you everybody for taking the time to, out of your schedules, away from your kids, being on a Zoom for another 90 minutes when you're probably working, and stay well out there.
Thank you, Tara. Have
Thanks.
a great day, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.